why, but OBS doesn't like me to start with my camera open in another program. So I have to start OBS. Then I can go restart my thing. I'm sure there's a trick that I don't know. But let's see. Hello everyone, and welcome to the second live episode of the Archaeological Fantasies podcast / Twitch stream. And today we are speaking still on Nagpra because it is November, which is Native American History Month, and Nagpra also turned 30 this year. And if you joined us about 2 weeks ago, was it? We had a nice discussion about Nagpra, the law, and what that means in a law kind of way. But today I have brought on two new guests who, along with Christiana Krupa, will be able to explain Nagpra and how it applies to Native American and Indigenous archaeology in the U.S., and also speak to the tribal historic preservation offices, which are like the THPO, but not. So I have Kassie Rippee. Is it Rippee?
Yep.
Rippee. That's a good name, actually. I've got Kassie Rippee with me, who is part of a THPO herself. She represents one of the tribes. I will let her explain that in more detail because I will butcher those names. And we are also we're also joined by Lisa.
Cipolla.
Cipolla? Cipolla. So close.
Or Cipolla.
And Lisa.
Americanized version.
What is it?
Cipolla.
Cipolla? I like that. Sorry, I like names. But so let's start with Kassie. Give us a quick bio. Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Kassie Rippee. My title is Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Archaeologist. You may hear Tribal Historic Preservation Officer or THPO. It's just an abbreviation. I work for the Coquille Indian tribe. I am not a tribal member. I am just staff at the tribe. I've been with the tribe now for 6.5 years. Before working for the tribe, I did CRM up and down the Mid-Atlantic. I have a master's in bioarchaeology and a master's in Indigenous Peoples Law. As THPO, I wear a lot of hats. I do, like you said, I'm the THPO for the tribe, which means that anywhere that we're on tribal lands, tribal trust lands or reservation lands, I have authority over Section 106 and cultural resources concerns and issues. Off of tribal trust lands or reservation lands, it's the THPO, and I have to coordinate with the THPO. The Coquille Indian tribe is a little unique in that we don't have a reservation in the traditional sense. So it's a unique relationship in this part of the world. But that's just a little short blurb. Yeah.
Okay. Lisa, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Sorry?
I said Lisa.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, so I am the Cultural Resources Program Manager on an Army installation in California. Before that, I was with the Forest Service, so same job, federal land management. But now I'm with the Army. I've been there almost 11 years now. So yeah, I'm a federal employee, charged with doing compliance with federal law, which is what Nagpra is. And also I just am obligated to say that I'm here speaking on my own behalf and not on that of the Army or the Department of the Defense. My views are my own.
We're gonna get into that actually a little bit before we get too deep into this. And Christiana, would you like to reintroduce yourself?
Sure. Hi again, everyone. I'm Christiana Krupa, and I'm the Nagpra coordinator for the University of Illinois. So Nagpra is my full-time job.
Fun times. So, like Lisa was saying, I mean, everybody knows who I am, so I'm not even going to bother. I'm an archaeologist. I do CRM archaeology. I do not have a lot of experience dealing with either Nagpra or digging on tribal lands at all that are recognized. So that is why I've gathered you all here. And for our listeners and I guess viewers, before we get too deep into it, we did want to mention confidentiality, when dealing with things like Nagpra and archaeology in general, because I don't feel like a lot of people are aware that a lot of what we do is protected for what I think are obvious reasons, but may not be obvious to everyone. Anybody want to jump in and like just start beating the crap out of that concept?
Yeah, I will, because this is an issue I deal with a lot, just in general, not just with NAGPRA, but you've got the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, so which says to protect the location of archaeological sites, which is to prevent from looting and vandalism, which we know happens. Same with the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 304. The law actually allows for federal agencies to withhold the disclosure of that information, and even within the Department of Defense, it's controlled unclassified information, and it's because we know that looting and vandalism happens, and then also for the sensitivity for tribes to protect their sacred locations. I mean, it's in the law to do that, and then and obviously with NAGPRA and the locations of burials, it's really sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we have like a very low tolerance for respect in this country when it comes to human remains for some strange reason. Kassie, what's been your experience with confidentiality and the work that you do with the THPO?
Well, in addition to what's required under the law, there's also, just a note to highlight that it's not just about place, but it's also about practice and value. There are some things that that tribes just it's personal to the tribe or to that culture, and it's not for other people to know or to hear or to be a part of. And so even as THPO, I'm not even involved in some certain things, and so that's some of those places can and conversations can get a little challenging when we're talking to the public or even to other agencies, right, about NAGPRA and about repatriation and or even about Section 106 Cultural Resources Protection. I can't disclose all of those details. I can share with you what you need to know, and in a lot of cases, you just don't need to know.
Christiana, have you had experiences with this? With the confidentiality?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. Everything you say. Is this for Kassie or for me? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. Christiana, have you had any? Here, can't you tell who I'm pointing at by my finger at the screen? Sorry, it's so rude.
Oh, that's okay. So, yeah, my thoughts on confidentiality are that in terms of NAGPRA, so I've only worked with NAGPRA from the institutional perspective and not from the tribal perspective. But in the grand, please move, Nina. In the grand scheme of things, the most respectful way to approach things like this is to allow information to be released at tribal discretion. So whatever the tribes you're working with are comfortable with being shared, those are the only things that should be shared. This is particularly relevant because brought to the attention of quite a few institutions and tribes in the last couple of years that NAGPRA information is not exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. If information about Nagpra collections or ancestors is requested by members of the public, then that is required to be released by federal law, and there are no protections for that kind of information. Currently, there's an amendment to Nagpra in the House right now that I mentioned a couple weeks ago on the podcast that was introduced by Deb Haaland that introduces some additional protections for this kind of information, but it's just, one of the reasons that as much as we can limit the spread of information that the tribes don't want us to share, then we should be doing that as much as we can because of these kinds of issues. That's kind of my soapbox about confidentiality, but it's one that I think is really important because, frankly, not all information is meant for all people.
Mm-hmm. I think people have a hard time hearing that.
Okay with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a hard time with being told no.
Yeah, basically.
And it does look like we've got a little bit of a delay just for our people watching. So my experience with confidentiality is doing CRM, which is Cultural Resource Management, which is also contract archaeology. I'm the person who goes out and digs all the holes. And I'm usually just not allowed to talk about the project in general. Like, I can't talk about the client. I can't talk about where we are, that kind of stuff. So, like, you can vague talk around everything, but, like, I'll never mention names. But I've also, like I said, I've never worked on a project where we had anything like a tribal representative present. Never worked on tribal land, as far as I am aware. So, I know we had, let me pull up the Discord, because we had some really great topics that were pinned, because pinning is the new note-taking now. But, so, like Christiana was saying, like last time we did this, we talked about the law itself and the very specific, the institution side of it. And Christiana and I don't have field experience with it, which is why I wanted to bring the two of you on, because you both have in-field experience working with the tribes and with the Nagpra law. And that's kind of where my interest and why I wanted to do this, because as someone with no experience with it at all, like, I don't know what it's like. So Kassie, could you give us like a hypothetical, typical project for you that you can't talk about?
Well, first thing I'll say is there's no such thing as a typical project.
Right.
Every project has been different for one reason or another, and always in a way that I don't expect sometimes. But for Nagpra projects, I can, without giving any specific details, I can just kind of give you an example of one that we're currently working on.
Okay.
With the caveat, and clarification that I can only speak from my experience and as Tippo for one tribe, and I can't speak for the experience of other tribes or the preferences for other tribes. So we're working.
I think as soon as you get done with this, I'm going to have you explain what a Tippo is, because that's what I should have done.
Yeah. So the project that we're working on right now, we are working through an assemblage that is housed at a facility that already had one repatriation completed, and it was believed that the Nagpra had been done 2 decades ago. And it was discovered by a very diligent and hardworking person that the Nagpra was incomplete, and so a new Nagpra inventory had to be completed. And consultation, repatriation, the whole process started over again, which is frustrating in part because it was already believed to be completed, but also this project has been going on for 50 years, 40 years.
Wow.
And so repatriation, Nagpra processes are painful for the tribes, for the people that are involved. It's just continuing this painful process that it started a long time ago, and it's just continuing and continuing and continuing. And tribes really have very little control over the process, or really what the outcome is. Where we might like to see the entire assemblage, the entire collection returned, Nagpra only allows for certain components to be returned. And in some of those cases, we actually have to make arguments for how some of those elements fit into the Nagpra components. Some things that we or the tribe identify as something that should be repatriated, an institution may say, no, that doesn't fit the Nagpra qualifications. And it comes down to how does an item that is, who is classifying the item as sacred? Who's classifying the item as an object of cultural patrimony? And who gets to make those determinations? It should be the tribes. It's not always. There are also even legal definitions about what constitutes human remains. And those don't always fit with the tribal perspective. So just the process of identifying what gets returned can be challenging and doesn't always fit with the expectations of the tribe. And then the process of actually having it returned is long and cumbersome. So once we've got all of those items identified, then we have to wait until a list is completed, until it gets published to the Federal Register, and then it has to go through that process. So we know those items are there. Now we have to wait and wait and wait and wait some more.
Fun.
And so a lot of these things get held up in limbo for a really long, and it's just it's disrespectful and hard when we're the tribes are ready to put those items to rest and to take care of them. The pandemic has made it any easier.
I'm sure.
Institutions aren't able to get into their facilities to complete inventories or to do repatriation. We're not able to travel to go collect those ancestors that are ready to be repatriated.
I didn't even think about that.
You have to take kind of a health and human safety position and say, well, we have to trust that those ancestors are safe and being taken good care of right now, and just put our faith in our partners until it's safe for us to go collect them. So,
Christiana, you were mentioning that there's going to be, there's been some proposed changes to the Nagpra law. Are you aware if any of those changes will affect the issues that Kassie is having getting stuff back for the tribes?
Probably not. Unfortunately. The proposed changes are primarily to do with increasing budgets for things like civil penalties, which are great if institutions are not cooperative, but if they are, then that doesn't really address the issue of the process just taking a long time, and all the bureaucratic reasons that it takes a long time.
Or just the stalling tactics.
And part of the issue actually is that National Nagpra is extremely understaffed and underfunded, and everything is super backed up there all the time. So even if institutions and tribes are moving on collections really quickly in order to get them repatriated, there's only so much you can do in terms of moving things along quickly.
Lisa, you asked about, you said one of the things you wanted to talk about was Nagpra compliance and repatriation, and the comprehensive agreements that have been developed.
Yeah, so there's separate aspects of Nagpra. One is dealing with the inventories and collections that are already in possession of an agency that need to be inventoried and consulted and repatriated. And then the other side is planning for the future, for inadvertent discoveries, or if a known site's going to be excavated for some reason for a project. You would come up with the agency would come up with a written plan of action for that specific project. In the case if you encounter burials or you're going to relocate burials, hopefully people aren't doing that anymore. So you can do an individual written plan of action for a project, or if you can, it seems like the ideal thing is to work with the tribes and get a comprehensive agreement that would, like a programmatic agreement that would cover all actions of that agency and say, and spell out, this is how we are going to handle, a project going forward. The tribe is, the agency agrees to do X, Y, Z. The tribe will be monitoring. If remains are found, this is how we're going to treat them, whether it's left in place or removed, and who gets possession. And then the other, so that's just part of it. But there's so many different things that can go into it, and I know it's going to be very dependent upon each tribe. And then the other thing that has been brought up recently that I've never considered is how to deal with all the digital data. Like, you've got photographs and GIS locations, site records, things that are scanned in, and does anyone outline that in their comprehensive agreements or their written plan of actions? Because I don't, and it's something that we're starting to look at, and obviously it's going to completely depend on how the tribe wants those handled, but even things like an inadvertent discovery, which we get where somebody finds a bone and they're in the middle of the wilderness, and this happens on fires. Kassie probably dealt with that, and they'll stop, they'll take a picture, email it to me and be like, what's this? Do we need to stop? And 9 out of 10 times it's an animal bone, or something. But if it is human, well, that's now been emailed to somebody. I'm going to send it to the osteologist because I'm not an osteologist. And now, and it's like, okay, everyone delete that photo. So there's ethical issues and just, but that's just a whole bunch of stuff that it should go into a comprehensive agreement. And I don't know, Kassie, if you guys have been developing those with the agencies you work with. Or...
we have some agreements with some of the agencies that we work with. Most of the area that the Coquel coordinates on, we've got 1 million plus acres of ancestral territory. 99.9% of that is in public and private ownership, and about 75% of that is in private ownership. So and Nagpra, for those that aren't aware, is only applicable on federal lands or for collections that are on museums. When we're dealing with Nagpra, when we're dealing with federal agencies, each federal agency is very different. Some federal agencies are willing to work with MOUs or to develop an inadvertent discovery plan in advance. Some agencies are willing to work with the THPOs in advance of projects. Some agencies just don't have the capability to think that far ahead. They're understaffed, underfunded, and cultural resources aren't a priority for many agencies. We also have the challenge in our area that there are multiple tribes overlapping the ancestral territory. So where I work, depending on where you're at, we could have anywhere between 3 and 5 federally recognized tribes to coordinate with. So one inadvertent discovery plan or one MOU may work for one tribe, but it may not be appropriate for another. So coordinating on those overlapping interests can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge for larger pre-planning.
Christiana was mentioning the tribal overlap last time we talked about how, the ancestral land overlaps with several different tribes, or you can trace something back. Can you kind of refresh us a little bit on that, Christiana?
Sure, yeah. I was just talking about how it makes things really complicated for Nagpra, but it also makes things complicated for other aspects of archaeology.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things that I was talking about that is particularly relevant, but not specific to removal and tribes being removed from their homelands, and that making it difficult to pinpoint which tribes were in which places at which times. And so you sort of have to, with the benefit of the doubt, and sort of cast a larger net, if you will, in terms of who might have been in what places. And so that ends up with, if like where I work, if I'm thinking about a specific county in Illinois, I might have to consult with a couple dozen tribes about that county because they all might have passed through there at some point, and we don't know when exactly they might have been there. And so that would be an issue consulting for Nagpra, but also for consulting for things like CRM work.
So this goes back to, I feel like this kind of mixes in with compliance, which is something I'm vaguely aware of because it is something that I've been taught. You have to at least attempt to reach out to the tribes whenever you're going out on a larger project, if you're in an area with federally recognized tribes, which we're going to keep hounding on because that is the magical word here when it comes to the Nagpra law. But Christiana, I'm so sorry, not Christiana. Kassie, I'm going to do this more than once too because you both have K names. You were mentioning on the Women in Archaeology show about how compliance is more than just me mailing a letter 30 days in advance. What does ideal compliance look like to somebody working with the THPO?
Yeah, and that's even more important to consider and to be aware of in current times, in the time of pandemic. I'm working from home. I don't get regular mail. If you mail something to my office, I'm not gonna see it.
Yeah, you were mentioning that in the podcast episode the pandemic's been affecting that as well.
It really has. So people are still mailing things. Right now, folks are scanning stuff in and mailing and emailing it to me like once a month or something. but notification is not consultation. So, you can send me a letter, you can send me an email, but email is not always reliable either. So consultation is actually talking to and considering the concerns of the tribes. So if you've just sent me a notification letter, you can't guarantee that I've received it.
Right.
And a lot of federal agencies will put in the bottom of their letter, if we don't hear from you in 30 days, we'll consider that you don't have concerns. Like, this is not consultation. So if you haven't heard from me, then the next step is call, text, conversation. So let's set up a meeting. So yeah, compliance and consultation it's a relationship. It's not a letter.
Lizzie, what's your experience with compliance on your projects? Like how do you go through those steps?
Oh yeah, so the folks that I work with all prefer email, which is great. I don't have to put hard copies in the mail. So I'll send an email out, and then I'll wait a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, and if I haven't heard from them, I'll send a follow-up email, and just making sure you got it, let me know. And if I still haven't heard, then I'll pick up the phone and call. And usually they're pretty good about getting back to me. And it's a small area, so I don't have a whole lot of people, multiple tribes to work with. They are not fairly recognized, but California SHPO still wants you, and rightly so, to reach out, but as interested parties, not as government to government relationship. But I still always follow up, and I haven't had really any issue with people not getting back. And there are cases where they have gotten back to me and said, yeah, I have a concern, and then even, we'll call the SHPO and say we have a concern about this, and we've talked through it. So, but you're exactly right. A notification is not enough. You've got to follow up, make sure they received it, and make sure they say, yeah, that's fine, or not, and then talk about it.
So, since we're a half hour into this show already, what is a THPO? What does THPO stand for?
Right. So I always I never go into this quite enough, but I actually have an hour-long presentation on what is a THPO.
I only have a few minutes for this. I'm sorry.
THPOs, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, are the tribal version of a SHPO. They're authorized under NHPA. In order to be eligible to have a THPO, a tribe needs to be federally recognized and then apply to the National Park System for a THPO grant. So not all federally recognized tribes have THPOs. I think the number that I saw from National Parks the other day, there are about 200 THPOs out of the 570 some odd tribes that there are in the state right now, federally recognized tribes that are in the country.
Wow.
So not everybody has a THPO. Not every tribe even has a cultural resources staff. So every tribe's going to be different. And
right.
What qualifications can be for a THPO is going to vary by tribe as well. But THPOs in general, we handle the cultural resources compliance for tribes on tribal lands. And then we coordinate on all cultural resources issues throughout the tribe's entire area of interest, whether that's tribal lands, ancestral homelands, unceded lands, ceded lands, usual and custom areas, deal with Nagpra issues, education outreach.
How does compliance and how does Nagpra issues, how do those look different when you're on tribal land versus when you're not on tribal land?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, we haven't really had to deal with that on tribal lands since I've been with the tribe. Count my blessings on that, and hope, yeah. But my understanding, and I could be totally wrong, so if anybody has any other information, we're still obligated to comply with Nagpra. So we still have to coordinate with other tribes that we may have an overlapping interest or area of interest with, and we have a a curation facility, a museum, right? So if we have a collection that's turned into the tribe or that we manage, we will have to comply with Nagpra as a museum as well. So my understanding is that we are still bound to all of those laws. It's a little bit easier in the fact that we are a tribe, so we at least know for our perspective what we don't have to do repatriation to ourselves.
Well, that's what I was kind of wondering about, like if something comes through, and so if something were to come through and one of the overlapping tribes was like, we would like that instead, what would happen if both the tribe you work with and a neighboring tribe were vying for the same objects? That was bad language, but
yeah, I understand. Yeah, so I think it's depending on a case-by-case basis. And it's going to depend on, tribal relationships. So some tribes have better relationships with one tribe than they do with another. Politics are what they are, right? And it's going to depend on a whole host of other facts. And does that other tribe have a valid claim, right, to that object or that ancestor? So we would have to go through that same process. The ideal is everybody can come up with an amicable solution, and
right,
find something that works for everybody. And that's what we always strive to do, whether we're working with Nagpra repatriation or repatriation off of federal lands or out of federal museums. We do a lot of repatriation here, and in our area, we have an overlap with several tribes. There's not a single area in southwestern Oregon that doesn't have multiple tribes that have and have legitimate claims. And so we have to do often joint claims, or we'll just come to some sort of handshake agreement that says we are going to take care of this, we're going to keep everybody in the loop, here's what the plan is. So it just depends on the case and the tribe and a lot of things.
I want to come back to something that Lisa mentioned earlier about, you can tell where you guys are located because I can point. Anyway, Lisa mentioned earlier digital resources. That's been a hot topic in archaeology in general, like digital data collection, and what the hell do we do with it now that we have more of it than we have actual artifacts, which is mind-blowing. And feel free, anybody, to jump in on this. How would we like to see digital data and digital artifacts being treated when it comes to the tribes and the Nagpra law?
Well, for us, when I'm dealing with digital data, it is no different than a physical artifact or an object, right? That is cultural material. It's no different, and so we treat it the same way. There may be the ability instead to retain copies of things at say the museum. So you will request repatriation of that material, but depending on what it is, that material may be a copy of it here and a copy of it there. The Coco Indian tribe actually completed something of a similar, a sort of related kind of digital, not digital, it's now digital, data download. And so it's called the SWARP project. If you're not familiar with it, it's the Southwest Oregon Research Project. So in the 90s, cool. The Coco Indian tribe got together with researchers, and they went to the Smithsonian and to NARA a few years later and pulled together all of the information that they could about the tribes in the Southwest Oregon coast. And they pulled all that information together and brought it back to the tribes. They housed one collection of it at the University of Oregon, and then distributed it as potlatch to all of the other tribes in Southwest Oregon, and say, now you have all the same information. This information that was once only in a museum 3,000 miles away, now it's accessible to all of the tribes. And
that was all digital?
It's been on the tribe to go and get that information, but the tribe did. And so now we consider that information to be cultural materials. And a lot of it's tribe's intellectual property to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
So that's interesting. The intellectual property idea, and all that. I do see that we have some questions coming up in chat. I will get to them, but I want to get everybody's opinion on the digital archaeology first, because a little bit of it kind of takes us off. Christiana, sorry, you were having you had a moment. Would you like to go back to your thought?
A moment. Yeah, the data thing is complicated because it also, in one sense, depends on when the data that you are interested in were collected. So if it's collecting new data, then you can make arrangements and agreements about things like how you're going to collect it, how it's going to be preserved, what's going to happen to it, who's allowed to see it, all these kinds of things, which is great and probably the ideal way for things like that to be handled. It's a little bit trickier when you think about things like data that were collected 50, 60, 70 years ago, and sort of going back to things like intellectual property issues, and the fact that for some projects that are completed with federal grant money require you to post that data for public access. And so, if you choose not to do that, would technically be violating the terms of the grant agreement. However, there are a lot of grant programs where you can make requests for exceptions to things like that now if you're working with tribal data. There are a couple of ancient DNA labs that do this, for example, that work with tribal communities and don't want those genome sequences.
Yep.
There she is.
Oh, wait.
Maybe.
She lives.
Told you. It was bound to happen. Are we still? Hey, everybody who's watching us stream, we can still talk, and I'll have the video up in just a second. If you want to try to pick up where you left off.
Yeah.
Christiana.
I think I was just saying that it's really complicated, the idea of repatriating data. It's a good one, and I think it's great in theory, but I think it's hard to convince people that they should repatriate things that they're not technically required to. This is an issue with Nagpra in its own right. The issue that was raised earlier of the fact that there are plenty of things that the tribes would like to see go home that are not technically required to be repatriated under the law. Data is one of those things. And so I think it really just depends on who you're working with and what kinds of data. Also, I think one of the questions in the chat was about preserving digital data long-term, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about when they offer to repatriate things like 3D scans. Like, does the tribe have the capability of storing and displaying a 3D scan? Because some tribes don't have running water. Like, how are you going to address these kinds of issues in a way that actually returns these things to people in a way that makes them accessible? I think is something else that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, it's just the overall storage of data is kind of tricky. Lisa, do you want to weigh in on when you're putting your projects and proposals together? Oh, I still don't have video. What do you guys do with the data? What do you propose to do with the data?
It's just, what's written into the government contract is all data is property of the government. It stays on my computer, on my shelf. It may get distributed publicly in some ways, and realizing that we should be putting a lot more out there and not keeping all this gray literature. But if it's a university project or something, there's a lot of that data out there, and so I've got excavation reports from the 50s that included burials, from UC Berkeley. So I have that. Berkeley has it, but we don't have a plan for, should I have all these photographs of these human remains sitting on a shelf or not? Can you do a report and just redact the photo? Is that good enough, or
I have no idea. I have a hard policy of no human remain photos, so.
Yeah, and these are things, like Krystiana was pointing out, like from the 50s and 60s, that's sitting on a shelf. So no, I want to explore further, coming up with a policy, coming up with a plan, returning these maybe as part of a comprehensive agreement. This is what we're going to do with what's already out there, to make a plan moving forward.
I want to go back to a comment that was made in the chat, which was, can the government claim artifacts? Can our government do that? I'm not positive.
Claim artifacts?
I don't think we can claim artifacts in the name of America.
Under Nagpra.
Yeah, if it's an excavation on federal land, and the way
it belongs to the government, I guess, until the Nagpra.
But if it's no, I've never heard of that.
Technically, I guess if we're storing it.
We can go back to the issue that we mentioned last time about how international repatriation is not really a thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's like we're not like England where we just kind of go and grab shit and say it's mine now, but we kind of are.
Oh, aren't we?
Hypothetically, no. I don't know. Anyway, and then okay, so yeah, that's yeah. All right, so I'm gonna try to muddle my way through this one because I don't know the answer to this. But M Zimmerman 90, I think that's Mike. You'd mentioned that there are about 200 THPOs and there are 59 SHPOs. I was wondering if you could comment on the disparity in HPF funding, given that as of 2017, SHPOs split a pot of 43 million in funding, while THPOs only split a lot of 9 million. Yet most of the onus for repatriation is on the THPOs. What can we do to ensure THPOs have the financial support they need?
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer for you, but it's unfair.
Maybe give them more money. Was that you were is that part of the law that's getting fixed? Krystiana, do we know? No, it's just for penalties, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's the particular issue. I don't think is Nagpra.
It's not.
No, that's federal funding thing. Lisa, do you have an idea? Oh no, we have no sound.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
In a sense,
yeah, there we go.
The onus is on the agency that's in possession of those remains, and the agency needs to come up with the funding to make sure that happens.
Yeah, but when you're dealing with a government agency that's reliant on getting their slice of the federal pie, which may or may not be available, what do we do then?
We are often told as tribes to apply for a Nagpra grant, which is different than the HPF THPO funding, right? So THPO funding comes from one pot, and then there's a pot of money that specifically applies to Nagpra grants. And there's two types of Nagpra grants. There's one that's specifically for repatriation. It covers like training, travel, and supplies for reburial, but not construction costs for reburial stuff.
Okay.
You can't cover like food or anything like that either. It's really, really restricted. And then there's another Nagpra grant that covers something else. I can't remember the specifics, but they're not a whole lot of money, and they certainly don't cover all of the stuff that THPOs do outside of Nagpra. The disparity of funds is a huge issue, and the Nagpra or the THPO funding that I get in for my position doesn't even cover my full position, let alone the other positions that I have underneath of me or all of the other program costs.
That's a big difference. I mean, that's a big difference. I did not realize. I mean, I don't know what any of these numbers are, honestly, but yeah, that's unfortunate. I don't have a better word for that. Have we considered GoFundMe accounts for various projects?
There actually is. There are tribes in the Columbia that have used GoFundMe to fund repatriations.
On the one hand, that's cool that they were able to do that, and on the other hand, that kind of made my soul die a little bit, knowing that that's what had to happen. Mike, I don't know if NPS supplies the Nagpra grant. Is that
They do.
okay? So yes, you go. Quit asking questions I don't know the answer to. Let's see. Okay, so we are at the point where in my show I usually ask my guests, is there anything in particular you would like to get out there into the world having to do with the topic that we didn't get to in this episode? So let's start with Lisa. Is there anything in particular that is burning a hole in your brain that you're like, damn it, I wanted to mention that on this show? Now is your chance.
I think we covered a lot of my questions in the last one. But, yeah.
Very nice of you. Sorry, Kassie. Is there anything particular you would like to make sure that you get in the show?
Just, we are everybody's partners. We're not stakeholders, right? We're not adversaries either. We have some really great partnerships, especially with those that we do Nagpra with. And
we the Tippo or we archaeologists?
Tippos.
There you go. I'm like, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, Tippos. We're partners for archaeologists, for museum professionals, for Nagpra folks. We're everybody's partners. We want to see a successful outcome for everybody. And a lot of those relationships, they can be really good. We, at least in Oregon, we have some really great partnerships. So
that's good. That's good to know. Christiana, final thoughts?
Well, this is not Nagpra specific, but it is Nagpra adjacent.
There you go.
Those of you who are members of the Society for American Archaeology may have already seen something about this, but the organization is currently attempting to rewrite their statement on the treatment of human remains, which was written several years before Nagpra was passed and has not been updated since then. And so that would have been what, the 60s? And the Committee on Native American Relations are both working on getting feedback from the membership, their efforts to update the statement and make it, with the times, if you will. So this is relevant to Nagpra, but it's not specific to Nagpra. So I just wanted to sort of plug that and say that if people are interested in seeing SA do something maybe a little bit different and a little bit more progressive, they are inviting membership feedback on how to improve that statement.
Well, I guess the first step is I'm glad they're finally doing that, because the Nagpra law is, I'm older than the Nagpra law. So that's weird. But yeah, people should definitely go check that out. The Society for American Anthropology. Is it archaeology or anthropology? Definitely go check out their website. They have good information there, 9 times out of 10. They have their controversies, as any group does, but it is what it is. Give me just a second. I'm sorry. It's not the virus, I promise. Thank you all for coming on to the show. After listening to the Women in Archaeology episode, I'd like to have Kassie come back and talk about how COVID's impacting the tribes there, because you said you were also the COVID coordinator.
Was. Not anymore.
Oh, well, that's, good.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to kind of talk about that a little bit, because I don't think people are aware of how bad the COVID's actually hitting a lot of the tribes. So that, I think that would be a really depressing but really informative episode to have.
Yeah.
And Lisa, thank you for joining us. Christiana, thank you for coming back. Did we hit all the highlights? I got all my questions answered, so I'm happy.
Great.
We covered most things.
There we go. All right, well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the audience for sending us questions, and we will see you next time we do this, which I don't know when that will be, but sometime next month, maybe. Bye, everybody.